This is a presentation called Tips and Tricks for Migrating from Oracle to MariaDB. And my name is Anders Carlson. I'm a principal sales engineer here at MariaDB. I have a long background in the database business, and I've been working with a lot of different database systems over the years, which is why I'm prepared to run this presentation for you now, because I've been doing a lot of different migrations over the years to and from different database systems. Right. So I got an agenda for you today. We only got 25 minutes, so this is going to be reasonably quick. So you're not going to learn everything about migrations, but I'm going to give you as many answers as I can in this short time. The agenda, I'm going to do an introduction to migration, some things you want to think about before you start a migration, some things you want to do, how you want to deal with migrations and stuff like that. Then I'm going to move into talking about cultural differences between Oracle and MariaDB. There are cultures in different database systems and how you develop applications and how you build infrastructures, be it SQL Server, Informix, DB2, Oracle, MariaDB, whatever. The cultures are different, and this affects how we're going to go ahead and do migrations. SQL mode equals Oracle, right? SQL mode equals Oracle is one of the key features in MariaDB that allows migrations from Oracle to MariaDB. But do you want to use it or not? That's what I'm going to discuss in this section. Then we move on to talk about schema migrations, right? This is usually the first step in actual migration project, right? You migrate the schema, data types, indexes, tables, what have you not, right? I'm going to talk a bit about that with a focus on data types. Then I'm going to say a few words about procedural code, and isn't a lot of it. There's a lot to say here, but in the name of time, I'm not going to talk a lot about these things, but I'm going to say a few words about how you go ahead and migrate things like procedures, functions, triggers, packages, what have you not, all of these nice features, right? I'm going to mention some words about Oracle proprietary features and how you migrate those. And hopefully I have time for some questions and answers at the time. So with that said, let's move into the introduction to migrations, right? So when you look at migrating from Oracle to MariaDB, beware that it's more or less always possible to do so. The question is, how much work do you want to do, right? How much do you want to change your application, change your data and all that? I'm not saying you shouldn't be migrating, but I'm saying that in some cases you might be better off doing a rewrite, right? Let's assume your application really isn't very good. It's like a spaghetti code in that, the schema isn't terribly good and all that. You might be better off just rewriting the whole shebang instead of migrating it. On the other hand, there are applications that are really simple. In a day or two, you have migrated applications, databases, everything, right? I've seen this happening. I've been involved in a couple of these, right? But beware that this is for very simple applications. I have never seen a reasonably complicated application being migrated very fast, even if it's like using some sort of like a middleware, such as like Hibernate and what have you not, right? It doesn't help. There's still things that needs to be migrated, that needs to be tested, there's QA, all of these things, right? And be prepared to migrate application code, right? You might not need to do it if the code is simple, if you got like a layer in between, as I said, Hibernate or whatever, it might be that you don't need to do it, right? But be prepared to do it because you might end up having to do it anyway, right? There are few cases where you don't need to visit the application code. They do exist, but there are few and more or less always only simple applications. So migration assessment and planning. That is the first thing you want to do before you look at your application, right? Always do an assessment, like look at how much data you have, look at how many tables you have, how many indexes you have, what data types are being used, which ones are likely to cause problems, which are likely to be simple, right? You need to look at the application, at least like visit it a bit and look at things like application complexity, how much relies on database features, is it using dynamic SQL, all of those things, right? Once you have that in place, figure out a plan and do time estimates for the different steps in the migration, right? And create test and staging environments so you have something to work with in between when you get to the point that you have something to work with, right? So you can test, so you can do staging, so you can maybe do like a user acceptance testing, all of those things, right? Be prepared to do that and do that early on before you start your actual migration, right? The cultural differences between Oracle and MariaDB are there. And they're actually more significant than you might think, right? As an Oracle developer, you typically end up looking at Oracle for as much as possible of your application, excluding the UI code, right? So let's say you have like a Java UI, well, that's in Java. The rest of it is at Oracle, right? That's how you build it. You don't rely on outside features, things that comes with Linux or from like your Java framework and stuff like that. If you can put stuff in Oracle, you will do that, right? And I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying this is the case. And I'm not saying it happens all the time, but it happens quite often. And Oracle developers typically tends to put a lot of stuff into procedures and packages, right? The SQL that you see in Oracle application is typically more complicated than what you see in MariaDB applications. You tend to see like one big SQL statement doing the job, or two or more SQL statements in MariaDB, not because one is better than the other, but because that's how things are done. And you also see Oracle developers using proprietary Oracle features, right? They have something to do. Here's an Oracle feature. They use it. If it's proprietary or not, they don't care. It solves the problem. You got an application to write. No one asked me to use non-Oracle features, so of course I'm going to use that, right? And you also see a lot of outdated and deprecated Oracle features in use still to this day, even in reasonably recent applications, because these features have been around for a long time, because Oracle has been around for a long time, and Oracle has tried to deprecate features that are clearly outdated, and developers just will not listen, right? They continue to use them, and they continue to appear in old and as well as new applications, right? And beware, there are some features in Oracle that are must-haves, right? But in some cases, these must-haves are there because they overcome a limitation in Oracle itself, right? If that limitation doesn't exist in MariaDB, well, it isn't a must-have in MariaDB either. So look at what you want to do. Don't look at it by feature. Look at what are we going to do? What needs to be done? What needs to be present for performance to be acceptable? And then you migrate it, right? MariaDB developers, on the other hand, are typically very pragmatic. They're focused on the actual problem. They look at what needs to be done and they do it. If it's in MariaDB, fine. If it's like somewhere outside of MariaDB in the Linux environment or in the operating system or somewhere else, right? But it's there, it can be used, it will be used, right? And like that is the case, right? Oracle, MariaDB developers in general are very pragmatic, right? And beware that MariaDB, to a slightly larger extent than Oracle, assumes that the SQL that you give it is decently well written and optimized, right? Oracle is slightly more relaxed towards badly written SQL. I'm not saying there's a huge difference, but there's somewhat of a difference, right? And with MariaDB, beware that there are certain infrastructure components. Here I'm looking at replication and MariaDB MaxScale, but there are more of them, right? Stuff that you put into play to create an environment which works really well for MariaDB, which is actually in the MariaDB server itself, but it's actually infrastructure component from that comes with MariaDB that solves problem, right? So if you're an Oracle, people tend to solve everything with one monolithic component, right? There are cost and licensing reasons why that is so, right? With MariaDB, you don't do that. You set up replicas, you have like multiple servers, you distribute a load over multiple machines. Replication is simple and easy to use and easy to set up. So, hey, you use that feature, right? Whereas with Oracle, you tend not to do that, right? So pick the right tool for the job, look at how infrastructure is being built by these different database systems, and use the appropriate tool for the job. Now, getting technical, What is SQL Mode Oracle? Well, SQL Mode Oracle is a feature in MariaDB that turns MariaDB into slightly more Oracle look, right? It will support Oracle PL SQL. It supports some Oracle functions, some Oracle set operators that behaves oddly in Oracle. They are in the SQL standard, but they behave differently there. And in general, in MariaDB, they behave in accordance with the SQL standard. But in SQL Mode Oracle, they behave like they would in Oracle. And there's some data type aliases and more stuff like that. You don't have to have SQL Mode Oracle on all the time. You can run parts of the application without it on. You can run it by session level, or you can set it globally, but then reset it on a session level if you want to do that, right? As for data types, just so you know it, SQL Mode Oracle does not introduce any new data type. It does introduce aliases for common Oracle data types that are mapped to corresponding or somewhat corresponding data types in MariaDB. So do you want to use SQL Mode Oracle or not? It really does sound like you always want to do that when you're migrating from Oracle. Actually, the answer is that you might and you might not, right? It depends a bit on the situation. If your application is really simple, you don't have that much to migrate, it's just like a few thousand lines of procedural code, you might be better off just rewriting whatever you have, right? It depends on a bit, but beware, there is no difference in performance with SQL Mode Oracle and SQL Mode not being set to Oracle. The reason why you might not want to do it is that you generally don't want to mix two different types of procedural code. Even though MariaDB supports it, from maintenance perspective, it might not be such a good idea, right? And before I move on from this, right, don't migrate bad code. That's a bad idea. Be sure that your code is okay before you start migrating, right? So schema migration. The first thing you look at, right? And these are the data types, right? Oracle data types aren't that different from MariaDB data type. Varchar is Varchar 2 is pretty much the same as a Varchar in MariaDB, and Varchar 2 in Oracle. You don't see that used much. It's like a 2-byte Unicode. You don't see that, but it is supported. There's an alias for it, and it's just a Varchar with characters set UTF-8, right? Date in Oracle is actually datetime in MariaDB. Long row ID, these guys, you don't see these guys much in Oracle applications anymore. You do see them in the Oracle metadata, but not in the applications, and they typically don't pose much of a problem. Timestamp in Oracle would be timestamp in MariaDB, but actually it's not, because the MariaDB datetime type includes time zone, which the Oracle timestamp does not. Blob and clob, from a database perspective, are similar to blob and text in MariaDB. The difference is on the application side of things. If there's a huge use of blobs and clobs in your Oracle application, they're likely to use the specific blob and clob APIs, which do not exist in MariaDB. So it depends quite a bit on the application, what you're doing here. Looking at the numeric data types in Oracle, the number one numeric data types in Oracle is number. And this is a variable length data type. And the precision and scale is optional, so you don't have to specify it. And thing is that the number data type is actually variable length. So however you declare it, that does not tell you how much is going to be stored. The storage size of a numbered data type column is determined by the actual value that you store in there, right? Also, number is a fixed point decimal type, right? So knowing all these things, right? Number is this really flexible Oracle proprietary data type that can store any kind of number, fixed point numbers, integers, what have you not, right? That means that there's some things for us to look at and things for us to consider when we migrate, right? In real life, you might see this. You think, right? An integer is declared as like any kind of precision and zero scale, right? Fact is, you never see this. For an integer, for a column that is like, for example, a primary key that comes from a sequence, or in the case of MariaDB, from an auto increment, you might in MariaDB expect an integer, And in Oracle, you might expect number star comma 0. No, you don't. You actually expect to see number. And the number can store anything, but like it doesn't matter how you declare it. The value that you store in there, if that comes from a sequence, the sequence generates an integer, it makes no difference, right? Everybody who's developing Oracle applications does this, right? So what does this mean? Well, it means that you have to go to the actual value for a column that is declared as number in Oracle to determine, is this an integer, or is it double int or a big int, or is it actually a floating point value? What is it? You have to look at actual data to figure that one out, because the number type can store anything in it, right? Now, the way SQL Mode Oracle deals with this is that if something is declared as number, well, it doesn't know what to do with it. The closest corresponding value in MariaDB that can store like any kind of value, be it floating point or integers or whatever, is a double. So it replaces this with a double, right? This is generally not a terribly good idea. This is likely, as you see in this example, an integer or a big int, right? That would be a better fit. To know it, though, you have to look at the actual data. And you have to look at the actual data to figure out what do you want to migrate this data type to. There's no other way of doing it. Looking at Oracle PL SQL and packages and things like that. What Oracle PL SQL is the programming language that Oracle has developed and is promoting, and they use this for procedural code. And Oracle is the ones who define it, and they tell you what gets in there, what doesn't get in there. There's no standard for PL SQL or anything like that beyond what Oracle tells you it includes. Oracle PL SQL includes the PL SQL language itself and the number of supporting things like, and we're going to look at this in some detail. And it includes a number of built-in packages that does different things, right? We support SQL PL, which is similar to PL SQL. We support most of the normal constructs. We get into that real soon, right? And we support some of the supporting constructs, but not everything. The MariaDB native procedural language is SQL PSM, which is defined by the SQL standard group. And in MariaDB, you can mix SQL PL and SQL PSM. Is it a good idea? Maybe, maybe not. But to use SQL PL in MariaDB, you have to switch on SQL Mode Oracle. Now, looking at the actual features supported in PL SQL versus SQL PL in MariaDB, the usual control structure, like if statements, while loops, what have you not, cursor for loops, those things are supported, right? Cursor attributes are also supported, similar to what's supported in Oracle, row counts, isopa, what have you not, right? Table and column variable types that reference other tables and other types is there. We do support PL SQL style exceptions, and all the usual differences in the SQL itself is also supported because this has to be run in SQL Mode Oracle, so the same goes for the built-in SQL inside the procedures or functions themselves. A few words on dynamic SQL. Right? Dynamic SQL is very popular with Oracle applications. And general, MariaDB does support dynamic SQL, but Oracle supports it more. Oracle is much more flexible, and there are some attributes of dynamic SQL that makes it not a very good candidate for migration. You might want to rewrite if you bump into applications that are using dynamic SQL. Above all, dynamic SQL is horribly complicated to debug and tune because you don't exactly know what SQL is being run until you actually run the application and the application build the actual SQL to run. In particular, PL SQL and Oracle support something called the DBMS SQL, which is a supporting package supported by Oracle that allows you to do a bunch of different things with dynamic SQL. This is not supported by MariaDB. If the DBMS SQL is used extensively in your application, consider rewriting the aspects of your application that are using this package. you're better off doing that because this is likely going to be very complicated to migrate. Pipelining and ref cursors are Oracle features that are used to pass data between like different parts of the application, such as like between functions and different procedures and packages and what have you not. MariaDB doesn't support any of these guys. What can you replace them with? Well, I would say you can replace them with JSON and temporary tables, but your best bet is likely to rewrite the code to not use this passing of data between procedures or aspects of procedures at all. But it depends on your situation, of course, but in general, always consider doing a rewrite to get rid of these constructs, right? And finally, a few words on Oracle object types and type tables. You don't see these guys used much, but they are there. They were invented as part of Oracle way back in the 1990s when object orientation was a big thing, even in databases. The Oracle type tables is a strictly proprietary feature of Oracle. It's not supported by MariaDB. And you likely want to migrate away from them, right? You might, in some cases, replace them with JSON, right? These guys also come with something called collections and arrays in Oracle. These guys are also not supported by MariaDB. I say replace them with JSON or replace them with a structure of tables, right? A classic relational structured table. When you migrate, you might want to look at using JSON in some cases. Here are two examples where we're using type tables or when we're using user-defined types and type tables, right? To the left, there is an example of using a type table, right? In that case, I would say rewrite it. You're better off rewriting type tables and just using the actual columns that they should be with the actual data types, right? In the right example, we're using a user-defined type called address T as an embedded column in a table called emp, right? In this case, you might actually be working with JSON. It's not such a bad idea replacing this with JSON. Depends on your situation. If it's not used a lot, you might as well just rewrite the schema. If it's used a lot all over the place, you might be better off replacing it with JSON. That might not be such a bad idea. Depends a bit on the situation. Conclusion, when you're migrating from Oracle to MariaDB, right, you always want to do a migration assessment, right? There's no way out of it. You need to assess what you're going to do, right? How much data do I have? How many tables are there to migrate? How many procedures do I have? What's the complexity of the procedures and the application, right? The cultural differences is really important and something you don't want to forget about, right? Take it into consideration when you migrate. If you don't do that, you're likely to run into some issues, right? The MariaDB SQL mode Oracle feature is really helpful. I'm not saying anything else, right? If you've interpreted what I said before as something like that, it's not true, right? SQL mode Oracle is really cool and really helpful, but you need to understand what it does and you need to understand what it doesn't do, and you need to understand how to work with it, right? As for data types, Oracle MariaDB data types are pretty similar, right? Migrate them is not terribly complicated. It works pretty well, but understand the differences in these data types. There are syntax differences and there are semantic differences that you really need to understand, right? As for Oracle proprietary features, consider them carefully. Don't just like Google it and go for it, right? Test, consider it carefully, look at what your different options are, the pros and cons of the different options before you head for a migration. Often you actually want to do a rewrite. And with that, thank you very much. Thanks for listening and see you out there. Cheers. Bye-bye.